I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker to you, and not just because I've known her since nursery school. Arika Okrent is an Evanston native who's been fascinated with languages from an early age. She flitted from language to language in school, wondering why she couldn't just settle down and commit to one, until she finally discovered the field that would support and encourage this scandalous behavior, linguistics. After some lengthy affairs with Hungarian, she taught in Hungary after college, and American Sign Language. She earned a master's degree in linguistics from Gallaudet University, the world's only university for the deaf. She began a PhD program at the University of Chicago, where she fell hard for psycholinguistics. She first worked in a gesture research lab and later took up with a brain research lab, where she conducted the experiments that would earn her her degree in 2004. By that time, she'd begun to spend long afternoons with the languages that even linguists think they're too good for, the artificial languages, losers like Esperanto and Klingon, in which she has earned her first level certification. Initial feelings of pity and revulsion gave way to fascination and affection, and she embarked on a whirlwind romance with the history of invented languages, about which she'll be speaking to us today. The love child of her passion was her 2009 book, In the Land of Invented Languages. Please help me welcome Arika.
Thank you. I'm still just thinking about that picture. I am so glad that you save everything. I'll have to take a closer look at that later. Thank you so much, and thanks, Sherry, for inviting me. And thank you all for coming. This is a great crowd here. It's very nice. This is the book that I'm going to talk about, In the Land of Invented Languages. I started working on this book while I was working on a degree in linguistics. Wandering around the language stacks in the library, I would find these little self-published books and pamphlets with titles like New World Language Can Be Learned in Under an Hour, Most Perfect Logical System of Meaning, and all these books by people who decided they didn't like the sloppy imprecision of natural languages, and they decided to sit down and create a better one from scratch. Now, most people aren't quite sure what it is that linguists do. And when you tell someone you're a linguist, they say, oh, so you're going to tell me if I make any mistakes in my grammar, right? But that is not what we do at all. In fact, it's rather the opposite. What linguists do is study language as a part of nature. It's out there in the world, like insects or rock formations or weather patterns. And what the linguist wants to do is describe it. What scientists of those other things do. Describe it, analyze it, and try to figure out how it works in its natural state. So what you might think of as grammatical errors, we think of as very interesting data points. And data on how language really works in the minds of people. So when someone comes along and says, hey, I've invented a better language, it's like someone telling an entomologist, hey, I've invented a better beetle. And first you're going to think, what a ridiculous idea. And then you're also going to find it a little insulting. I mean, to say something like that must mean that this person has no idea how complex and amazing beetles really are. And that's how linguists feel about someone who would dare think that they could do better than nature, that they've got it all figured out. When we know, the more you study natural language, the more you realize how mysterious and amazing it is as it is. So looking through these projects, I started feeling a bit insulted, but also amused. And then I got drawn in by the stories of some of these inventors, the hardships that they suffered working on these projects that they couldn't get anyone to pay attention to, toiling away in obscurity, hoping someone would notice them. And since I had noticed them, I felt an odd duty to take them at their word. Try to learn some of these languages and see how they worked, and in some cases find communities of people who really do speak them. I went to Esperanto conferences, I talked in bliss symbols, I earned my first level certification in Klingon, and I saw some really strange things. But I also found a fascinating history of language engineering, one that's longer and more productive than most people realize. One of the sections of my book is titled 900 Languages, 900 Years. You don't have to be able to read all this, but this is just a cluster of some of the languages that have been invented. There's AO, an instant world language, Mundian, Mundial, Neo-Latinus, Latino Novo, any number of languages you can see that have this idea of creating something new, sometimes out of existing parts, sometimes from scratch. And this 900 languages, 900 years is a lowball estimate of how long and how many. The first one up top was invented in the 12th century. This has been going on for a very long time. That first one, lingua ignota, was invented by the German nun Hildegard of Bingen. And here's a word from lingua ignota. We don't, and this word means earwax. Now, we don't know much about this language, why it was invented and written down, and what it was used for. But it's very interesting that it has a word for earwax. It suggests that this was not just a language for prayer or divine communication. It was a language of everyday things. It's an extensive made-up vocabulary, including words for all sorts of quotidian, normal, daily things. Some have speculated that it was maybe a secret code for her to use with her nuns, or maybe it was an artistic project born out of divine inspiration. But it wasn't until the 17th century that things really get going in language invention. It's then, around 1657, universal character, that you start to get words that look like this. And this means hired mourners at funerals. So this was a language that basically attached numbers to concepts, the idea being that you could then communicate with those numbers. The letter part stands for grammatical information, like in this case, that it's a noun. So 3996 is the concept zone. The R stands for the fact that it's a noun. And it basically goes in alphabetical order. You attach one to the first concept in the dictionary and keep on going down. And the idea was that if we could do this, then we would detach languages from their different countries, their different places. Take the concept, make it a number, then no matter what language you spoke, you could communicate with the numbers. You could work things out like doing a mathematical equation. And the reason that people were coming up with this idea, there were a lot of these number languages, had to do with the leaps in scientific knowledge that were happening at the time. So this is a page from Newton's notebook. There was a huge leap in scientific and mathematical understanding taking place that made people want to build a language that worked like math. At that time, in the early 1600s, mathematical notation was just being developed, and it was something amazing. This is how you did math before mathematical notation. This is a page from Arithmetica Integra, and it's dependent on spoken language. So you did math in Latin, basically. And it makes it really hard to draw generalizations out and see things more clearly. Great discoveries were being made at this time because the leaps that were made possible by looking at things in terms of equations and variables rather than in chunks of text like this. So people started to think, well, what if we had this kind of notation for everything? It would be better than our messy natural languages because, like math, it would expose the truths of the universe. And many attempted something along these lines. Here's a sentence from that universal character. You could write it out like this, or you could say it. You pronounce this sentence as leb to rayon fo pi tofo sensen et pif tofo sensen. So you could communicate with this in spoken form or in written form. But this language went nowhere because it wasn't really any kind of mathematics at all. You couldn't add the numbers or perform operations on them in any meaningful way. They were really just substitutes for words. They might as well have been words. But the most successful language of this era went a lot further than this simple kind of word-number substitution. The Real Character and Philosophical Language of John Wilkins was published in 1668. He started by trying for a universal mathematical language of truth, and what he ended up with was a 600-page organized tree diagram of every concept in the universe, which brings us to our next word. What does this word mean? Well, because of the way his language works, the form of the word tells you exactly what it means. You just need to match it up with the structure of the universe. Each piece of the word, each letter in that word, is a pointer to a branch on Wilkins' vast tree diagram of the universe. And as you move through the word, piece by piece, you move down the nodes of the tree till you get to the concept you want. So it starts with CE. So you look on this chart here. CE is, where is it here? It's over there, motion. So, okay, we know, first of all, it's a type of motion. Let's move down to the next branch. It's a motion of purgation of the serous and watery kind from the consistent and gross parts from the guts downward. This is how you say shit in Wilkins language. Okay. So what's the first thing you do when you get a dictionary of a new language, right? Well, I try to look up the word for shit. But it's very instructive. What is this concept? Wilkins had to decide. He had to put it somewhere in the tree. What it is, well, it's the opposite of vomiting, okay, at that lowest node. It's a type of motion. It's a type of purgation. And while it seems a little ridiculous to think of it this way, this is actually also where the word goes in a thesaurus. A thesaurus is organized the same way. In fact, Roger was very familiar with Wilkins and invented the thesaurus on the same principles. And if you look up where it is in the thesaurus, it's also a motion of purgation. That's where it makes the most sense in the logic of the universe, I guess. So Wilkins produced an amazing document here, but for various reasons, this language never took off. For one, it was impossible to say anything because you had to know exactly what you meant to say before you could even form the word for it. But even 200 years later, people were still experimenting with this idea of having the word somehow show you the conceptual categorization of its meaning. Okay, so this is a word from a language by a Frenchman called Jean-François Sudre. It's called Sol, Re, Sol, and it's based on the notes of the musical scale. That means coffee. So each syllable in there is a note on the musical scale. Do, si, fa, sol. You can say this word, as do, si, fa, sol. You could hum it. You could play it on the violin. And he went around Europe putting on a sort of performance where he would say a sentence, or he would have someone in the audience say a sentence. A student of his would play it on the violin, and then he would translate it and say what had been said. And people were, amazed by this. Here's some other words, or here's a sentence in it. I would like a beer and a pastry. Do, re, mi, fa, la, do, si, fa, re, do, si, re, si. And, oops, I just put the wrong one. And here's a list of vocabulary of food items, and you can see all food items in Sol Res Sol begin with do-si. And so you know those first two syllables, you know the general subject matter or subject area, and then you go down the word to get to the more specific concept. Kind of like Wilkins' idea of putting the meaning right into the form of the word itself. So lots of people thought this was a really neat trick, but hardly anyone was inspired to actually learn it. And it came out over 150 years after Wilkins, and it was a lot less involved, but it worked on these same principles. Now, this strategy of having every sound or letter in a word somehow contribute to the meaning was popular for a long time. Despite how hard it was to really use these languages, people continued to think that it was the simplest, clearest, best way to get to meaning, even when they, in all seriousness, came up with words like this. This is by an American, James Ruggles. That's what it means. So each letter in there basically contributes a little piece of this very, 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 very precise meaning. And a lot of the language inventors were all about precision. Natural language, so sloppy, so ambiguous, so imprecise. If you could put it in pieces like this, you could be so precise. But, of course, it's impossible to speak this way. No one would ever need to say all of this in one word. So in the second half of the 19th century, inventors started turning away from this approach and thinking instead about practicality or usability, learnability. Okay, these languages are too hard to actually use. Now, at that time, the steam engine and the telegraph were making it easier than ever for people to move around and communicate across borders. And at the same time, nationalism was on the rise in Europe. These big old empires were falling apart. And these nations, really language communities, started fighting for power, often against each other. Some inventors took a look around and thought something needed to be done about all these different languages. There was no more time for a grand philosophical inquiry into the true meaning of everything. What was needed was a usable tool. Language inventors dropped this idea of perfect categorization of concepts and said, hey, we've already got a bunch of words or word roots that most of us pretty much already understand. Let's just use those. So, mi amas, mi estas, mi parolas, mi dankas, mi havas. We can kind of get that. I love, I am, I speak, I think, I have. It's understandable. It has regular endings. It's mi havas, vi havas, any person. It never changes the ending. It always ends in as in the present tense, no irregular verbs. It's mostly Latin roots with a bit of Germanic and English. These particular examples are from Esperanto, which is the most famous invented language or most successful. If you know a bit about European languages, you can pretty much understand Esperanto right away. Okay, you can be up and running pretty fast with this. So it feels like speaking a Romance language with a few other language families sprinkled in. Okay. Yeah, Laksimio amas la hundon. Sometimes those sprinkles come where you least expect them. I always think it's funny that the word for bird in Esperanto is birdo. Now, this was invented at the end of the 1800s by a mild-mannered doctor named Ludwig Zamenhof, and he managed to get people inspired to learn his language by promoting it as a way to achieve world peace. And it was much easier to learn than the ones that had come before, and it is still spoken today by thousands. There's an Esperanto convention in Chile, some Esperanto musicians performing, Esperantists at some kind of protest march. So though Esperanto survived, it did gain a reputation for shall we say, eccentricity. Here's some Esperanto. That's the seal of the Esperanto Nudist Society. A book about spiritism in Esperanto. Esperanto anarchists meeting. This was the sort of cluster of interests that went with Esperanto. And so by the early 1900s, this whole practice of language invention had become a little tainted with the ode de quackery. It became very hard over the next few decades for a language inventor to get anyone to pay attention, because it started to look really naive to claim that you could do something as grand as overhaul human language, and even more naive to think you could somehow change the world by doing that. There was some excitement about it in the beginning. There was talk of making it the official language of the League of Nations. But after the Second World War, people had sort of given up on this idea of language being a cure for the world's ills. Until the 1960s, when there was a breakthrough in language invention and using a new approach, a more cool-headed scientific approach. A sociologist named James Cook Brown had his language project published in a long article in Scientific American in 1960. And he didn't make any grand claims about exposing the truths of the universe or bringing about world peace, just this. It was a language to be based on logic, and he would test whether people would think more logically if they learned this language. Well, he never got around to doing these experiments. There were years of language development, followed by a long battle with his former helpers and collaborators, followed by a court battle, and ending with a schism between Loglan and its offshoot Loglan. Anyway, I think one of my favorite words in Loglan is and. Okay. There's a few ways to say and in Loglan. Now, if you think about it, our own English and is really sloppy when it comes to logic. I mean, to speak Loglan, you have to be clear about which sense of and you mean. For example, here's just two of them. John et la Alice pu bevri la pipno. If you use that form of and, it means John and Alice carried the piano, but you make no assumptions about whether they did this in the same time, in the same place. Maybe John did it in 1933 in Luxembourg, and Alice did it yesterday in Chicago. You're making no assumptions about where or when. This is just two propositions, both happened. That's all you're saying. It's that and. The second one, la John joy la Alice pu bervi la pipno. That means John and Alice formed a mass entity and carried the piano. So that one you do suggest that they did it together. John and Alice, as a mass entity, carried the piano. So these are specific senses of and there are many, many of them. I think there's 20 or 30 words for and in Loglan, and they're discovering more all the time. Think about this word. So that's what a logical language gets you. And I'm not sure if it makes you think more logically, but it sure makes it hard for you to say anything. And there were other languages that were designed as thought experiments of this kind, like this one. This is these are the six different ways to say menstruate in La Dan. This is a language invented by Suzette Hayden Elgin. The purpose was to more adequately capture the worldview of women. Now, it's not all about bodily functions. Here's a very handy word in Ladan. Radidin. A non-holiday, one that's supposed to be a holiday, but it's so much work in terms of cleaning and preparation and too many guests and none of them help that it's actually a burden. So, useful, right? Yeah, you can pack all that into one word, and you're expressing a different sort of worldview. So she put this out as an experiment to see whether if women had access to this kind of language, they would take it up and use it. After 10 years, she declared this experiment a failure and noted sadly that another language with a quite hyper-masculine quality had in the meantime started to do extremely well. Klingon. Warrior language. So here's a few words from Klingon that are very easy to learn. Oi means pain. Ugh means hangover. Rotte means fish. You see that one? The GH from tough, the O from women, the TI from nation. This was an old joke exposing the illogic nature of English spelling. You have the F from tough, the O from women, and the TI from shun. You spell fish, right? So Klingon uses that joke. Shahut is the word for tush. It's tuchis backwards. So the inventor, Mark Okrent, used a lot of language play of that kind in the vocabulary. There's these little inside jokes. But these words are kind of misleading because Klingon is actually very hard to learn. The linguist who invented it, whose name is Mark Okrent, actually, and we decided we're some sort of distant cousins. We don't know exactly how we're related. But it was built by... He combined exotic features from various natural languages. So it sounds like this ungodly combination of Hindi, Arabic, Tlingit, and Yiddish. And the grammar works like a mix of Japanese, Turkish, and Mohawk. The grammar is very complex and sophisticated and different from English. You can't just plug Klingon words into English sentences. Here's a line from Hamlet, which has been translated into Klingon. Tach par tach be dach mut levan vekel nish kuv a ya dach shan vakcha pu ye shik di. Okay, so this is to be or not to be, which comes out as continue or continue not. So that be on the end of tach is a negation particle. So it's not just English sentence with Klingon words plugged in. You negate with an ending. Now, sentence this. It consider need. So need is an ending, this is an ending. Honor, interrogative particle. Brain, locative particle. Fate, aggressive, torpedoes, phasers, and endure wins. So it's continue or not to continue. Now I need to consider this sentence. Is it honorable when in the brain the torpedoes and phasers, you have to endure the torpedoes and phasers of aggressive fate? So this is a complex interlinguistic translation, not just a plug in the words and you've got it. Okay, this takes a lot of skill. There's me at one of their annual language conventions. Thanks. So young. As you can see, for most of them, it's not about the costume. Klingon represents a new era in language invention, one where languages are created not to fix some problem with natural languages or make them easier to learn or make us think more clearly or logically or truthfully. Klingon is complicated, difficult, hard to pronounce. It has irregularities. It has exceptions to its own rules. And it turns out people will flock to an invented language, even if it has no practical purpose at all, simply because they think it's interesting and fun. It's language for language's sake, and dare I say, art for art's sake. This new type of invented language is called a conlang, from constructed language, or art lang. And Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien, is seen as the father of this form. He worked for decades on the language in his the languages in his Lord of the Rings books. He started working on them when he was a child. And in fact, he claims he wrote the books in order to give his languages a place to live. He was fascinated with Welsh, the sound of Welsh, with the grammar of Finnish, and he wanted to match the ideal language he had in his mind with a creation of his own. He did them purely to fulfill this artistic vision of what a language should look like. And he took the things he loved about the languages he knew, he was a philologist, and played them up in his own creations. So here I am at a meeting of the Language Construction Society in 2007. These days, people on Conlang, or constructed language forums on the internet, invent languages in order to explore interesting questions about language or express something that they love about natural language. They don't want to cure natural language, but explore by doing something creative with the idea of language. And they've not given up on inventing languages, but they have given up the fight. Language is no longer the enemy, but a muse. Here's a few examples of some of these artistic languages. Brithanig answers the question, the thought experiment, what if English had become a romance language? Ithquil is, what if every kind of meaning could be expressed in a verb ending? There was an article about this language in the New Yorker last year. There's something like hundreds and hundreds of particles and noun and verb endings in this language, and some group in Russia discovered it and started trying to use it and have meetings in it. Kelain answers the question, what would a language that violated language universals look like? This is a very interesting one. In Tokipona, could you make yourself happy by speaking a language that only had positive words? Tokipona, it's a minimal language that focuses on the good things in life, and it actually has quite a bit of a following. It only has 118 words, so it's very ambiguous. These words are used in multiple ways, and that's okay. So this is the word pona. It means, it can be a verb, improve, fix, repair, make good. It can be an adjective, good, simple, positive, nice, correct, right? It could be a noun, goodness, simplicity, positivity. And it could be an exclamation, great, cool, yay. So I'll just conclude here with a pona. Thank you.